Hi, my name is Julia Felice. I am the founder of Sanctuary Publishers, a very grassroots, non-traditional small book publisher committed to resource activism, consistent anti-oppression, and raising the voices of marginalized people, human and non-human. I'm also an anti-racism educator at antiracismclassroom.com. Today, I'm going to talk about issues relating to racism, neuroableism, and white supremacy for the animals. I'm an autistic and ADHD person. I do not consider myself disabled by my neurodivergence. I am instead disabled by the lack of awareness, lack of understanding, lack of acceptance, and lack of accessibility in most spaces, which are neurotypical focused and white centered. As you can see, I'm reading what I want to express because I prefer nonverbal communication, as it allows me to really process and narrow down what I want to communicate. Much of my work as a writer, publisher, and research activist is based on my own experiences, stories, and narrative. While data and research can be of value, as other Black, Brown, and Indigenous people know, they often uncover our reality a little too slowly for the type of people that need the data and research in order to believe our experiences are a reality. And yet, these values are also mostly meaningless because they never lead to any actual change in the now. In addition, a number, a percentage, a chart cannot fully express an experience or its impact. Those of us living our reality within intersections have to wait even longer for the rest of society to catch up. I say these things as someone with formal scientific training, awarded undergraduate and graduate degrees by research. I simply eventually recognize that research and data are centered around a specific experience and reality which does not include mine or that of my communities. While today there is slightly more of an awareness with regards to racism still affects my everyday life. From the perception that I am less qualified, less intelligent, less deserving, less respectable, to the acts of treating me as such across all aspects of my life. Did you know, when it comes to employment, white people will consider hiring a white person with a criminal record over a black person without a criminal record? Did you know Jim Crow laws purposely ensured people like myself remain underprivileged and underpaid? You probably do. Because numbers and research spit out by white institutions hold more validity and value than the experiences of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people when we actually speak as a community. Interestingly, we are reduced to a we and denied individuality unless the we collectively demands white communities address the inequalities still forced on us for their benefit. Only then does our individuality suddenly matter. Quote, well, my friend is enter Black, Brown, or Indigenous to scripture, and this one single person said that's not true, unquote. How convenient. I guess we'll wait another 100 years until they figure out another crumb of the shit pie that makes up our lived experiences. Somehow, white people get to become experts on us while we're left to quote white so-called anti-racism experts on our own experiences going on 500 years. Just 2 days ago, I had a so-called critical race studies scholar write to me about my anti-racism courses. They stated, I have so much still to learn as a white person about race and racism, but my work around race involves blah blah blah. Cue the racism, the microaggressions, the entitlement, the neuroableism, the violence society taught white people to exert over others. Cue the subconscious assumption that even though I'm an expert in how racism and race affects my very existence, I should just revert to overt slave status and offer my labor for free, for the good of this person's work to serve them, someone who will later become an expert on an experience they have so much still to learn about, and will learn from only the same papers that spit out the same facts and numbers that Black, Brown, and Indigenous people have inherited from generations bound to the same system. And let's discuss the neuroableism that I am expected to tolerate for the comfort of neurotypical people. Oh, but you seem so intelligent. You communicate so well, is the typical response I am given when I need to communicate my neurodivergence for whatever reason. Add that to the racism, and I must be the most intelligent, well-communicated, neurodivergent brown person on the planet until I stop assimilating with a quite polite, smiling head nod and actually attempt to communicate in the way I was designed to, sharply and to the point through one-dimensional conversation in which I say what I mean and mean what I say. Enter my brown skin, and I'm suddenly aggressive, mean, rude, and severely too blunt for comfort. And here we see the car crash at the intersection of race and ableism. Enter tone policing, where respectful and kind are code for know your place under white supremacy. These words whistle cater to whiteness. This is our space, not yours. Last year, I was forcibly terminated from a fellowship at Cornell University after the program failed to provide me with accommodations they agreed to. Things as basic as printed copies of the presentations and a printer that wasn't broken, so I could present verbally as I am doing right now. They also failed to address the racism that I experienced in the program from several people, including an invited speaker. At 36 years old, I experienced firsthand how race and ableism are weaponized against each other to emphasize the disposability of people of color from the U.S. from white institutions. That we, again. I forgot, after having worked hard to decolonize for years, that at an Ivy League university, people of color from the U.S. will be expected to perform for whiteness. I forgot, after years of working to accept myself as a Black, Indigenous, really neurodivergent, two-spirit queer, that I'm only allowed to exist as what society demands my kind to exist as, through a one-dimensional identity. An identity bound to a specific stereotype that we must embody at all times within white spaces. The one that determined my place in society should have been walking amongst the 70% of Latinx femmes that are maids and cleaners because of occupational segregation and devaluation of work forced on us. The truth is that I was caught off guard at Cornell University. I was naively surprised by the blatant disregard for the we in exchange to label me a rogue, overprivileged individual undeserving of the same opportunities others deserve in exchange for their silence. The director of the Alliance for Science program, Sarah Evanega, justified my termination by weaponizing my neurodivergent way of existing, claiming it was a disruption for the others who were more deserving of the program than I was, because according to Evanega, the global fellows, all from outside the U.S., and I quote, have lived lives far less privileged, I think, than Julia. These are people who have suffered immensely, and they're at Cornell University to have a tremendous life-changing program, unquote. Oh, what a privilege it is to exist in the United States as a brown neurodivergent person, right? Where, as I mentioned, laws purposely kept us and keep us segregated within pretty much every aspect of society, and only very few are allowed to enter those spaces as long as we keep to the performances required by whiteness and neurotypicality. If you're curious what happened after I was terminated, I have spent close to a year now attempting to hold them accountable so that no other neurodivergent Black and Indigenous person or other person of color has to experience what I did. Well, unsurprisingly, Cornell claims that I was not discriminated against. They included a list of issues that need to be addressed by the program based on the discrimination I experienced due to ableism and racism. No apology, just my ruined reputation right on Cornell University's website, quietly linked under official statements, for requesting printed materials, access to a non-broken printer, and for flagging racism and asking them to do something about it. Oh, what a privilege to be born and raised in the United States, where my ancestors have lived since pre-colonialism, and still we do not have access to equality after it was stolen from us 500 years ago. Oh, what a privilege to be a brown neurodivergent person from the U.S., Sarah. Again, I find it amusing that those that do not experience what I do are the ones that get to make the decisions on whether or not my experiences are real. And the decision from Cornell and the continuous discrimination I experienced reminded me of an article I recently read on the experiences of Black folks when we report discrimination and how we suddenly receive acknowledgement, compensation, or basically anything for the discrimination apart from blatant validation of our worthlessness outside of serving white society in our own country. How ungrateful we are to complain, right? The article explained a specific case in which, and I quote, Black welders and painters testified to regularly hearing slurs, threats, and other derogatory comments over years of employment at a trailer manufacturing company, unquote. They even had to deal with finding nooses hung around their workspaces, and yet the judge dismissed the case because he did not believe these experiences counted as hostile, and that they could cause distress or any type of harm on the Black workers having to endure this type of work environment. When asked what would qualify as hostile, which is what is needed to prove discrimination, the judge responded by quoting a 1971 appeals court decision, and I quote, "Environments so heavily polluted with discrimination as to destroy completely the emotional and psychological stability of minority group workers," unquote. Again, definitions, decisions, rulings, and laws by and based on perspectives of a community that barely acknowledges how we got here in the first place, a community that believes it can quantify emotional and psychological harm caused by experiences they force on people of color. To quote Marcia Law, the wife of one of the workers, "The law was not written for us." While most white persons are automatically believed when it comes to trauma, pain, or needs, we're not even believed with a paper trail of evidence and dozens of witnesses. This is white supremacy. That is to have privilege. So, how does this all apply to veganism as a movement in itself? Veganism was not created for us. It was a concept that existed and then coined by an overprivileged group of white British people claiming they stood against oppression in a time where it was illegal to be a mixed-race person in the UK. For example, it was illegal for people like me to exist despite my existence as a triracial person being directly tied to colonialism. And like the term white fragility and every other word coined by white society, something that belonged to people of color became segregated. I say it again, vegan spaces were not created for us, Black, brown, and indigenous people. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that mainstream veganism, known as white veganism to Black and indigenous people of color, employs the same supremacist tactics that the rest of society does. This is done by telling marginalized people that our experiences, again, those white vegans do not even experience and add to, are not so bad, particularly when compared to what non-humans go through, as if oppression between groups is even comparable. Again, our trauma, pain, needs, and experiences are not believed or acknowledged, even when you can recognize those of non-human animals. When you subconsciously see all marginalized people beneath you within a hierarchy in which you sit at the top, then yeah, I guess all oppression seems the same unless, like non-humans, you are unable to talk back. White supremacy ideology makes it easier for you to recognize the trauma, pain, needs, and experiences of non-humans because they can't hold you accountable for your own hand in their oppression. And so, non-humans are somehow forced into the role of someone's for you to save above everyone else. Somehow, they are thought of as grateful when those who claim to be saving them are the ones that force them into the role of upholding the oppression of people of color and pretty much all other marginalized people. As I explained in the chapter I wrote for an ecoability book, quote, "Due to the specific experiences and expectations, the view and understanding of the word vegan tend to be vastly different for vegans of color when compared to the mainstream vegan movement, which, like the rest of U.S. society, is one that centers whiteness," unquote. Just as my communities and I are expected to remain silent and perform expectations as a group along our place in society, white vegans tend to hold the same expectations while employing similar tactics of tone policing while silencing and disregarding the experiences as well as perspectives of people of color and other marginalized groups. As I mentioned, kindness, respectfully, nice, all words that have been made synonymous to violence for Black and indigenous people of color, as they are routinely used to shut down conversations about racism and neuroableism. These words are commonly used to remove the focus from the oppressor and place the blame on the anger and pain of the oppressed. If you were nicer, then maybe we would listen, but they don't, and have not for centuries. The only sound they tolerate is no sound at all, our silence. Many white vegans tend to invoke colorblind racial perspectives that follow the belief, quote, that the United States has moved beyond race and racism, and that the color of someone's skin does not matter in today's society, unquote. In this way, they invoke the familiar animals first and for the animals to minimize the oppression of marginalized vegans. Are we truly marginalized when compared to non-humans? They ask us from their limited single-view lens that never exists in our reality and insists on hierarchies. The most privileged in the movement are the determinants of who is marginalized while ignoring that the root of non-human and human oppression is white supremacy. This discourse makes saviors out of white vegans that justify and accept bigotry in the movement for the animals. This is how the movement continues to be oppressive in itself by silencing non-humans and ignoring how they were and are tools their ancestors used to oppress and exploit Black, brown, and indigenous people on indigenous land now referred to as the United States. Ironically, my veganism helped me to eventually acknowledge my privileges over other marginalized groups, even as someone with multiple marginalized identities. This is one of the reasons why I reject mainstream veganism and embrace consistent anti-oppression, after choosing to adopt the vegan label as one of my identities over 12 years ago. It took me a while to make my way out of the sunken place that veganism demands we uphold. The single-issue saviorism that keeps white vegans feeling good about doing absolutely nothing to address actual systemic issues tied to non-human oppression. As for neuroableism, it's not even something much of society acknowledges, and even less when neurodivergence intersects with race. Ironically, mainstream veganism also takes advantage of ableism in a misguided attempt to supposedly work towards non-human animal liberation when it allows claims that broccoli can cure autism and that going for a walk in the forest will magically heal my ADHD. People who hold the belief that a child born with ADHD is damaged easily succumb to ableist rhetoric for the animals. Single-issue activism, a lack of awareness of marginalization, and the resistance against recognizing that white supremacy is basically at the root of oppression means that veganism continues to center the most privileged in a society above non-human animals and marginalized humans. As you can see, explaining my reality, experiences, and thoughts as a person that lives compounding oppressions is not always a clear, direct path. Which one do I choose? Where do I start? How do I break it down in a way that I can communicate how race and neuroableism interact, weaponize each other, and are both still very much decided upon by those with the most privileges? How do I then throw in veganism and the rights of beings that are in the same situation the Black and indigenous people are stuck in, where those with most privileges are the ones that determine pretty much everything down to what we feel or not? What I can say without hesitation is that one cannot ignore how both forms of oppression have roots tied to non-human oppression. In the same way that racialized speciesism causes people of color to experience a knee-jerk reaction to speaking about non-humans as being oppressed through the same system that we are, ableism compounded speciesism is comparable to the same reaction when disability is spoken about along the same lines where the ties to non-human animal oppression to ableism are uncovered. You can't have dehumanization without non-human animals. You can't establish the hierarchies that persist to this day without non-human animals. You can't convince the majority in power that a marginalized group is less than without non-humans. Because, according to white supremacy, the way society must exist is white, cis, neurotypical, and human above marginalized humans, which sit above non-humans. When you establish a group above the other, you can be easily conditioned to otherize those that are different to you without a thought. In essence, to be non-vegan as a white person is to be firmly committed to white supremacy. To be non-vegan as a marginalized person is to be complicit in one's own oppression. And yet, to be committed to mainstream veganism, comfortably unaware and reproducing the same forms of oppression within itself, is to still forge a commitment to the same hierarchy set in place through the invisible concept of white supremacy that drives our society. So what is the solution? I can tell you, it's not one committed to the same system we have in place. It's a commitment to actually put in the work to undo hierarchies, to accept we cannot be experts on experiences we do not understand firsthand. It is a commitment to understanding we have to be consistent across all spaces and movements. That includes a commitment to first addressing the individual, yourself, and rejecting the idea that it's the bad, uneducated others that have yet to learn what the good, woke ones know. Because oppression and undoing it would just be trapped within a binary and yet another hierarchy, which is where society currently lives and is stuck. If you're interested in my work, you can connect with me via Sanctuary Publishers on Facebook. And if you are ready to get down to basics and address yourself, the individual, check out antiracismclassroom.com. Lastly, if you're a white person or white passing person and believe that slavery should finally end and that you should be working towards addressing racial inequality as well as the wage gap where Latinx femmes like myself make 52 cents to white men's dollar, if you believe in reparations and for paying for education that adds to your personal transformation through experiences and lessons you would not have otherwise have access to, do not just thank me. Do not just thank Black and Indigenous people. Pay us. You can pay me for the work and emotional labor I just spent in this space and elsewhere to educate you via Venmo at Julia Feliz, JuliaFeliz, or paypal.me/JuliaFB. Do you have further questions? I have written extensively on the issues, as have other Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, so I encourage you to pay me, pay us, should you need further guidance. I have published several books, articles, and resources, and offer consultations. Thank you.